When people talk about their favorite episodes of Season 1, the Blue Spirit is often mentioned for many reasons. The plot creates this great feeling of suspense, the choreography is fantastic, and the twist at the end caught a lot of people genuinely off guard on their first watch. But viewing this episode in the broader context of the rest of the show, there's even more to appreciate. Specifically, The Blue Spirit is a brilliant episode in part because it introduces the core conflict of Zuko's character, not by showing us the conflict itself, but rather showing us a coping mechanism Zuko develops for it. Here's the groundwork if it's been a while since you've last watched. Due to being in the storm, Sokka and Katara fall ill, so Aang goes off on his own in search of medicine for them. Fire Nation scouts see him and tell Zhao, who, having been recently promoted to Admiral, has more resources at his disposal than ever to track Aang down. He uses a team of elite archers to capture Aang and holds him prisoner in a nearby Fire Nation compound. Knowledgeable enough about the Avatar cycle, Zhao knows that he can't kill Aang since he would just be reborn somewhere in the Water Tribe, and the Fire Nation would have to start their search for him all over again, so he plans to ship him off to the Fire Lord. So with the protagonist locked up by the antagonist and his friends in dispose, only one character remains with the ability and motivation to rescue him. In the last example I gave in this video series, the writers used Zuko's status as a Deuteragonist to save the tone of the show. This time the stakes have been raised, and as a Deuteragonist, Zuko will be saving the main character himself. At first pass, the incentive for Zuko to do this is straightforward. He wants to be the one to capture Aang in order to reverse his banishment from the Fire Nation. But how Zuko goes about doing this showcases his psychology in a very interesting way. One of the reasons the first substantial look we get at the Blue Spirit is so impactful is the sharp contrast between the dark brush and the colorful mask. While it makes for a striking shot, the mask itself is rather impractical in terms of staying hidden. Why not wear a mask that provides more camouflage? I think the answer to that question is that for Zuko, it's very important for the Blue Spirit to be a separate and distinct entity from himself. Let's inquire about self-image for a second. This video series is obviously about Zuko's character, but there's a critically important component that I haven't touched on at all yet. Who is Zuko to himself? Investigating a character's sense of self-image is a cornerstone of emotional realism, in part because, despite being something as fundamental as your own sense of who you are, self-perception is often fragile. People tend to do a lot of mental gymnastics in order to maintain the image of the person they like to think of themselves as. This is how a character's self-perception can affect their actions. The methods by which people reconcile with actions that fall outside of the purview of their self-image can give a tremendous amount of character exposition in a really compelling way. Zuko's self-image at this point in the show is rooted in his pursuit of honor, but who a character thinks they are is only part of the picture. Zuko doesn't yet recognize that there are levels beneath his current self-perception, deeper, more human desires like love, acceptance, and a home. The absence of these basic human needs are much more painful to reckon with, so he uses honor as a proxy for those things. Up until Zhao captured Aang, the Fire Nation's definition of honor has been able to enshroud Zuko's deeper desires without conflict. But now that Zhao has definitively beaten him to his one chance of achieving that honor, Zuko's inner motivation now comes into conflict with his self-image, and now his only recourse to getting what he wants is to break into the compound and free the Avatar from the Fire Nation. This isn't just Zuko deviating from his self-image. This is a character whose identity revolves around honor, doing the most dishonorable thing possible. This is how the Blue Spirit comes to be. It's not enough for Zuko to just be in disguise, because that would mean Zuko would still be the one doing it. The mask is more than anonymity from the outside world. It's a kind of anonymity from himself. The separate identity of the Blue Spirit affords Zuko the compartmentalization necessary to cope with the cognitive dissonance caused by him doing something so antithetical to his self-image without succumbing to an identity crisis. Yet. Although this isn't the last we see of this persona, how and why Zuko uses the Blue Spirit in future episodes is for another video. For now, The narrative utility of the Blue Spirit's introduction is what matters. In a story of good and evil, your protagonist and antagonist are generally going to be representative of those two sides, but there is a third, much more common option, which is selfishness, a personal desire that does not align neatly into either of those two broader causes. Due to the privilege a Deuteragonist has in being uniquely unbound to both villainy and heroism, the archetype is especially well suited to this deeply human motivation. Selfishness is obviously also a common trait among villains and antagonists. Zhao literally ends up almost destroying the entire world in order to secure his personal legacy, but it is very rare for a villain's selfishness to manifest in a way that is immediately materially beneficial to the protagonist. A Deuteragonist has the freedom to follow their motivations in a way that can manifest throughout the story in organically advantageous ways to both the protagonists and the antagonists, even if they have to adopt a specific coping mechanism in order to follow those motivations while keeping their self-image intact. Having a selfishly motivated Deuteragonist in a story of good and evil incorporates a kind of wild card into the dynamic of the story, because you've effectively taken a duel between binary forces and added a third party in which either group can establish a fragile, opportunistic alliance. In this episode, that opportunistic alliance happens to benefit Aang, who takes the opportunity to briefly challenge the self-image Zuko went to such lengths in order to protect. After Zuko helps Aang escape, he's knocked out by a parting shot from one of Zhao's archers. Aang gets him to safety, and once Zuko wakes up, Aang asks him, what if the circumstances were different? What if Zuko wasn't the son of a tyrant, and Aang wasn't that tyrant's biggest threat?
Before the war started, I used to always visit my friend Kuzan. The two of us, we get in and out of so much trouble together. He was one of the best friends I ever had. And he was from the Fire Nation, just like you. If we knew each other back then, do you think we could have been friends too?
Trying to maintain a rigid, uncomplicated self-image while navigating a complicated world, a person's actions will likely deviate wildly from what they thought they were ever capable of. The Blue Spirit does a great job of not only showcasing the narrative utility of a Deuteragonist, but also the lengths to which a character can go in order to preserve their self-image while still trying to achieve their goals.